Today I'm taking a first look at my new imaging rig for 2025. Say hello to Big John. Hey folks, my name's Steve and welcome to Scotia Astro. After a cloud-filled end to 2024, I'm really hoping for better skies this season, and during a cold and raw winter here in Scotland, I got a bad dose of aperture fever. After an endless search and a good deal of analysis paralysis, I found this awesome Skywatcher 250PDS Newtonian, which I'll be sitting on a new iOptron CEM70G mount. In this video I'll go over why I chose this combo, take you through all the gear specs, and let you know the different ways I'm going to be using it going forward. As ever, I'll have links to all the equipment I mentioned in the description below, so go check that out if you're interested. Right, let's get into it. Many of my existing deep sky imaging scopes cover a focal length range of 135 up to around 650mm. I'm also using a Skywatcher Skymax 127, which takes me up to around 1500mm, but because of its slow focal ratio, I tend to use this mostly for visual work. Any imaging I do with it is usually confined to the moon and planets. So the hunt was on for a larger scope which could get me in closer to some of the more distant targets in the sky, and I decided to have another look at the Skywatcher PDS range of Newtonians. I already own the smaller 130PDS, which is one of my favourite imaging scopes, and you can see my rundown of it in another video, which I'll link up here and down in the description below. While the 130PDS is great for wider field targets, it lacks the range to cover objects lying farther away. The Skywatcher PDS range starts at the 130 and goes right up to a 300 model, which takes you up to just shy of 12 inches. Given that I'd be setting up and tearing down each night, I quickly dismissed the 300 PDS due to its sheer size and weight, but the 250 PDS looked like a viable option. As I'll mainly be using the scope for imaging, the 250's native focal length of 1200mm and the focal ratio of f4.7 seem like a nice compromise between speed and reach. I've also grabbed some additional accessories to speed things up even more, but I'll cover that later in the video, so stay tuned. Even though it's quite a bit smaller and lighter than its big brother, the 250 PDS is still a beast of a scope, so I then had to consider how I'd mount it. I already have a Skywatcher ASIAIR GT Pro, which I use as my main imaging mount, but with a fully loaded 250 PDS, I was worried about pushing the limits of the 18 kilo payload capacity. It's a fantastic mount and I'm sure it could handle it okay, but for imaging I didn't want to chance it, so I had to look around for another suitable mount. Given the length of the 250 PDS, I decided to go big and grab a mount which would easily handle its size and weight, as well as future-proof me if I was ever daft enough to hanker after an even bigger scope. I found my answer in the CEM70G, which is one of iOptron's famed centre balance equatorial mounts. A big mount demands a big tripod, so I opted for iOptron's Tri-pier, which integrates nicely with the CEM70G. I used one of these Tri-piers with my AZEQ6 and it's been flawless, so I knew it would handle my larger mount no problem. So this system gives me a rock solid foundation to image with, but let's have a closer look at the specs before I share how I'm going to use them together. The Skywatcher 250PDS is a 10-inch Newtonian reflector telescope which can be used both visually and for astrophotography. It has a native focal length of 1200mm and a focal ratio of f4.7, which isn't blistering fast, but it provides enough speeds to capture stunning images of our night sky. The steel tube weighs in at just over 14 kilos, or around 32 pounds, and it has a length of around 112 centimeters or 44 inches. So it's a hefty scope owing to that 10-inch parabolic primary mirror, and I can certainly manage it my own, but I've ordered this dual saddle handle from ADM to make things a bit easier. The PDS range are optimised for astrophotography due to the shorter tube lengths, which place the primary and secondary mirrors closer together for easier prime focus photography. The scope comes with a 28mm eyepiece, tube rings, a Vixen-style dovetail, and a 9x50 finder as standard. As I'm purely using the scope for imaging though, I'm not planning on using any of these included accessories. I've also upgraded some of the out-of-the-box gear, but more on that later. Unlike Skywatcher's standard Newtonians, this scope comes with a dual-speed Crayford focuser. This means you can get more precise focusing when you're taking your images. Again though, I've upgraded this focuser with other gear to automate the process. Onto the mount now, and this is the iOptron CEM70G Equatorial Go 2, which has a beefy payload capacity of 31.8 kilos or 70 pounds. I think this will really be plenty good for my 250 PDS setup, but it also gives me the option to increase my payloads in future if I want to. Those of you out there that speak iOptron know they usually produce different variants of the same mount with some letter and number designation. The G in this case means that the mount comes with an integrated guide camera, which iOptron calls the iGuider. I'm not sure at this stage whether I'll use it or just stick to my own guider which I can attach to my scope, but I'll have a play around with it and see how I get on. It's a nice feature to have though and cuts down on any wires. Speaking of wires, this mount also helps me avoid a spaghetti mess around my rig, thanks to its largely internal cable management system. The CEM70G provides two separate ports to provide power to your mount, which in turn can power pretty much any Astro gear you throw at it. There's a 12V DC input on the main panel at the base of the mount, which also includes ports for connecting an external guide camera through a standard ST4 port, and a port for a hand controller if you're using one. You can also thread in an antenna for the mount's Wi-Fi here. But that's not all. On the end of the RA axle, there's another 12V DC input and a USB-B 3.0 port. Used together, these ports help provide power to the outputs on the mount's dovetail saddle. On the front you have two DC power outputs and an iOptron specific iPort for connecting their own range of accessories, like their electronic autofocuser. On the back of the saddle there's also three powered USB 3.0 ports and two more 12V DC input ports. I'm excited to see this range of ports included in the mount itself, which means I don't have to contend with multiple power bricks and their associated dangling cables. This will help me too in limiting time during setup and teardown. Another handy feature is the integrated iPolar camera, which is iOptron's own version of an electronic polar scope. I tend to use other software to do my polar alignment, but again this is a nice feature to have, especially as it's housed right in the mount. This mount is packed with a ton of nice features, and I won't list them all here in this video, but the standout ones for me are the chunky and satisfying gear clutch knobs, the silky smooth altitude and azimuth adjustments, and the integrated Wi-Fi functions. There's also a beefy dual saddle for taking both Vixen and Losmandy plates for ultimate compatibility. I'll be sure to do a more in-depth review of the CEM70G once I've had a good chance to test it, so please subscribe and hit the bell notification below so you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Right, let's turn now to the upgrades that I'm adding to this rig to improve my imaging efficiency and some quality of life improvements that are nice to haves rather than essentials. On the mount side of things, I'm attaching my CEM70G to the solid chunky iOptron Tri-pier, which provides a solid foundation for imaging and keeps my guiding on track. I know how good these Tri-piers are, as I've been happily using one with my Skywatcher AZ-EQ6 GT Pro mount for a few years now. For me there was no debate here, because the iOptron Tri-pier is a proven winner. Onto the scope now, and I've switched a few things up on the 250PDS. Starting at the top, I've added a ZWO electronic autofocuser to maintain accurate focusing throughout my imaging run, and if I want to control focus remotely through software. I've got several of these units on other scopes, and they're super easy to attach to the standard Skywatcher focuser housings. Although I've retained the standard tube rings which come with the scope, I've replaced the included Vixen style rail with two much more substantial Losmandy dovetail bars, one at the top and one at the bottom. As well as giving me more space to mount hardware on top of the scope, like a mini PC or an ASIAIR, using the two plates increases the stability of the tube and prevents flexure, which can bend the scope and mess with your imaging. On the imaging front, I'm also planning to use two tried and tested Coma correctors, which are really vital for imaging. For those of you out there who don't know, Coma is caused by the inherent design of the Newtonian's parabolic mirror system, which causes stars at the edge of the field to lose their pinpoint shape and develop wing-like defects which can really ruin an image. For imaging especially, it's pretty much a necessity to eliminate these bird-like stars at the edge of a photo, so astrophotographers usually include a Coma corrector in their gear arsenal. There's a huge range of options out there, but I'll be using two correctors with this system. They both share certain characteristics, but one of them has another trick up its sleeve. Here we have the Skywatcher Aplanatic Coma corrector and the Starizona Nexus Reducer corrector. Starting with the Skywatcher offering, this Coma corrector is a nice basic unit which flattens your field of view, but it doesn't alter the magnification of your scope. It's actually optimised for use with Skywatcher's faster f4 Quattro imaging Newtonians, but I've been successfully using one in my smaller 130PDS without issue, so I'm not expecting any drama or hassle when I pair it with my larger 250PDS. You can also thread in 2-inch filters at the base. It's a great unit and I highly recommend it. My other Coma correctors from Starizona, and as well as flattening the imaging field and stamping out that nasty Coma, the Nexus also has another added benefit. This handy wee unit also acts as a focal reducer, which means that as well as effectively widening the field of view of my scope, it also speeds it up by a factor of 0.75. So for practical purposes, my 1200mm f4.7 250PDS becomes a wider and speedier 900mm at f3.5. This is great for astrophotography because I can shorten my exposure times or get more signal than I can shooting at the scope's native f4.7. Like the Skywatcher Aplanatic, you can also thread in your 2-inch filters into the base of the Starizona Nexus. Both of these Coma correctors give me more options depending on my target and use case, so it's handy to have choice here. And now finally, let me take you through some of the ways I'll be using this beast of a rig. For the majority of the time, I'll be doing traditional deep sky astrophotography with the 250PDS. With galaxy season fast approaching, I'm excited to use the 1200mm focal length to really zone in on some of those smaller and fainter galaxies in our night sky. I'll be employing the Star Arizona Nexus in a couple of ways. First of all, I'll be using it too for long exposure astro imaging, and the wider field of view and faster speeds is just like having another scope, so I can increase my choice of targets. I'm also looking to include the 250PDS in some upcoming live streams, and when paired with the Nexus reducer, I'm hoping to show you all some fun live stacks of distant objects, some of which I've never had the chance to image myself before, so stay tuned for those. With a nice 10-inch mirror and a stable imaging platform, I'm also planning to try out the 250PDS and some lunar and planetary imaging, so it'll be fun to see how it performs here. So thanks for joining me in my first look at my new rig. I'm really excited to get going with it and test it out under the night sky. I think with its versatility through the upgrades I've added, I'm going to have loads of fun with it. I'll do a full follow-up video later in the year after I've thoroughly tested everything, but in the meantime you'll be seeing it in action in some live streams coming soon. Let me know in the comments below if you have a 250PDS or any other tips and tricks you want to share. I'd love to hear about your own experiences. Take care of yourselves, have a great day or night wherever you are in the world, and clear skies to you all.